Hello, good morning everyone. Patricia Falchetti here from Social Living Solutions. This morning I've come on to talk to you about steps to take when you first get an autism or ADHD diagnosis for your child. I thought it would be really helpful to some of you that follow me to do this live, because often when we first get a diagnosis, or if we've recently gotten a diagnosis, we're not exactly sure of what the next steps are to take. And one of the biggest drivers of why I did start my business initially was that, because I remember when we first got diagnosis for our oldest son, we didn't know where to go, what services to, we didn't know what was available, what services were available, what we needed, what supports to seek, and things like that. So I thought that that might be really useful for some of you. Before I continue, I will just remind you that if you're on, please come and say hello and let me know that you're watching, because I'd love to know that you're on. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please pop them in and I will answer them as I go. And then if you watch later on after this live, please remember just to put #replay in the comments so that I know that you've watched, because what I'm really trying to do is make sure that my information that I'm doing on both my lives and my YouTube videos are useful to you and are really helpful. So I'm just going to start now just going through some of the facts. I've just got some information here behind me as well, which I'm just going to look over as I'm talking so I don't forget anything. So first thing I want to say is that I do acknowledge that I do have people that follow me from all over the world. So what I wanted to say was I appreciate that knowledge and support around autism and neurodiversity will differ so much from country to country, and attitudes will differ as well. So what I would like to say to you first and foremost is the earlier that you can bring in the earlier you can bring in support for your child, the better. It really makes a big difference. Now, I just also though want to just say, while I say that, please do not beat yourself up if your child is a bit older and you've only just gotten a diagnosis. Sometimes we don't realize how much our children have been struggling until they're a bit older, and sometimes they don't, our kids don't get diagnosed until they're in their teens. So and look, that's fine. Please don't beat yourselves up if you are in that situation. The fact that you've reached out, you've gotten the diagnosis, and now you're on the pathway to supporting your child and getting them the help they need, you're completely on the right track. So please don't, because I do have parents that come and say to me, "Oh, I wish I'd known earlier, I'd done something earlier." But sometimes, sometimes we think it's anxiety, sometimes we think it's depression, sometimes we think it's other, comorbidities that sit with autism, or, mental health issues, before we realize that it might be autism or ADHD, because these conditions sit with autism and ADHD. So sometimes it's hard to recognize that it might be neurodiversity, that your child might have a neurodiverse brain, a brain that works differently. So the first and the most important thing to try and remember when you get a diagnosis, when you first get that diagnosis, is you are not a failure, and nor is your child flawed. Okay, so neurodiversity, having ADHD or autism, just means that we have a differently wired brain, a brain that is wired differently, and therefore the world that we're in has certain effects on our brains. So it's critical that you realize this, that you are not a failure and your child is not flawed. Because if you allow yourself to think this way, your child will pick up on it, okay? And they'll pick up on it, and if they pick up on it, it's a really slippery slope for them to poor self-esteem and anxiety. And I think one of the issues why we feel that our child is flawed when we get that diagnosis is because the diagnostic process, unfortunately, to diagnose autism and ADHD is deficits based. All they look at is what we can't do, what we're not managing with, what we're struggling with. That's how they diagnose if we have autism or ADHD, or both together. you're pushed into focusing on what your child can't do, what milestones they're not reaching, rather than on focusing what they can do and what their strengths are and the strengths that they possess. So support. So once a diagnosis is received and you're fine and you know you've kind of processed the information and everything. Hi Imogen. Oh, thanks for being on. It's great to see that you're here. So once, as I said, once you get that diagnosis and the diagnosis has been received for, you know, that you've got that information, and you're sort of now prepared to like think about the process and the steps to take, what I highly recommend is seeking the best support from people around you, professionals, and support for your family and your child. The thing to remember about autism and ADHD is it won't just affect your child, but because of the many challenges that come with being neurodiverse, it will affect your whole family. So it's really, really important that we think of supporting your whole family as well as your child. Sometimes the best support might come from people outside your family. You may find that members of your extended family actually struggle with the diagnosis, with the words autistic or ADHD. Or they may feel the diagnosis is somehow malignment on them. Now, this is particularly apparent in certain cultures, and I do see that happen in certain cultures, and that's why I am mentioning this. That that grandparents might not accept the diagnosis, or extended family might not accept the diagnosis, or from them might come in judgment about your parenting, the way you parent, and if you only did this, they wouldn't behave like this, and things like that. So that's why I'm saying that sometimes the support might come from, you know, close friends, good friends, rather than family. And that's not unusual. So a checklist for after diagnosis, and please, if you are watching, and as I said, Imogen, if you have any questions while I'm talking, please put them on. I think I've pretty much covered everything, but, you know, people that are watching might think of something else or might have questions. First and most important, and I stress this, is tell your child about their diagnosis. This is critical. There's so much research around now that says that the earlier you tell them, the better it is for their mental health. There's no shame around diagnosis. It's just, as I said before, it's a differently wired brain, and I see, and the way that I would suggest that you view a diagnosis as a path forward. Okay, now I've got this information. What do I do with this information? What's our path forward with this information? Because as I often say, and many of you that watch and follow me will know, that people with autism and ADHD, so neurodiverse people, have different strengths, okay? And they have so many strengths. They just have brains that are wired differently. There are books that you can access for younger ones that assist you in explaining your diagnosis to them. If your child is younger, you might find it easier to get a book and read through that book with them to explain the diagnosis. The other thing is support for you and support for your partner. Sorry, I'm just having some water because I've actually got a bit of a cold at the moment, so my mouth's getting really dry really quickly. So support for you and your partner. Now, this is probably one of the most critical things. I did this for myself really early on. One thing I did was to start seeing a psychologist to give me the support so that I could support my family better. And also to having someone from outside your immediate family who you can brain dump to, right? You can speak about the things you feel you can't say out loud at home. The struggles, the worries you experience is critical for you and for your mental health. You've got a long journey ahead once you get that diagnosis. So when you receive diagnosis, you immediately start thinking about what your child needs. But the analogy of that you cannot give from an empty cup is really, really important here. So it's really important for you to have good supports in place, whether that be a psychologist, a counselor, but someone that can give you and your partner that mental health support and that support outside of the family to help and guide you when you're struggling. Because there will be struggles, because you'll be dealing with other professionals outside, you'll be dealing with extended family, you'll be dealing with judgments, you'll be dealing with your child's school, which at times can be very, very challenging to get the supports that are needed in place for your child at school. So what support is needed for your child? So when you get a a diagnosis. So when you get a diagnosis report, often in the back of the report at the end is a recommendation section. Go straight to this section and work through the list as far as other interventions and specialists that are recommended are concerned. Start to either book or get on waiting lists for an occupational therapist if the report suggests that your child needs an occupational therapist, so an OT, speech pathologist, psychologist, and sometimes we need to bring in behavior support specialists if this is needed, but that will be in the recommendation section. And the reason why I say to action this really quickly is it's not just here in Canberra, but I know in Australia and I know in other countries in the world, the wait lists to get the support from these professionals are massive and sometimes really, really long. So to get on those wait lists now, and also consider maybe having to go outside of the state or the city that you live in to get those supports, because the earlier we get those supports in for your child, the better. Also consider, and I say this in inverted commas, alternative therapies, because I don't necessarily believe that they're alternative, because I have seen them work and really, really support neurodiverse kids and neurodiverse adults. So what I mean by these therapies is look at therapies such as energy healing and somatic therapy. That's spelled SOMATIC. These can be very beneficial as well as part of your therapy toolkit, because you do want a therapy toolkit. Many individuals with autism also have a condition that's known as pyrrole disorder. So pyrrole disorder is a deficiency in certain vitamins and minerals. And if you go and see a holistic GP, they can assist with diagnosing and treating pyrrole disorder. And treating that can often help with some of the symptoms that some of the issues that your brain suffers from being neurodiverse. So, and it makes a huge difference to your child if the condition is if they have pyrrole and it's treatable. So Imogen, I'm just reading a comment here. You said, great distinction, the brain dump space and heart witnessing versus practical and logistical support. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, and you love that I'm mentioning somatic therapies. Yeah, because they really are helpful. And I've seen energy healing make huge, huge differences with people with who are neurodiverse. And you've just asked about pyrrole disorder. So it's spelled PYRROLE. And what it is, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, often people who are neurodiverse, I think it's a deficiency in magnesium. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know magnesium is one of them. Zinc is the other one. It's magnesium, zinc, and something else, but there are specific supplements that you need to take for pyrrole. But you need to see a holistic GP, because the way pyrrole is diagnosed is either through urine samples or through blood tests. So the other thing to do, so the first thing is supports for your child. Look at that recommendations list at the back of the psychologist's report. Third thing is consider alternative therapies. And so, because look at it as a toolkit, that you're going to have a therapy toolkit in place. Then the third thing is contact the school. Okay, so contacting the school. So this is if your child's of school age, of course, and book in what's called an individual learning plan. Hey, James, great to see you're on here. So book what's called an individual learning plan and have that done as soon as possible. So what an individual learning plan is, and if also too, I will just stop here. If your child is older, if they're in their teens, I encourage you to get your child to come along to the meeting. The reason being that your child also knows the supports that they need in place in the classroom to help them learn. So what an individual learning plan is exactly as it sounds. It's done for the individual. It alerts, so if they're in a primary school situation, obviously they usually only have the one teacher in primary school plus maybe some specialist teachers, but it alerts their classroom teacher of what needs to be put in place to help them learn well at school, to help them to be able to focus, to help them with any sensory issues that they might be having in the classroom. So that's what the individual learning plan does. And at the high school level, the individual learning plan goes out to all the teachers, so all the teachers are aware that this person in their classroom is neurodiverse and they need these supports in place. The other thing too that I always stress to parents is to remember that these supports we put in place for supposedly that one child that might be that might be your child, I can guarantee that it probably will benefit every child in that class anyway. And usually for every child that is diagnosed in that classroom, there are usually another 2 to 3 that aren't. So usually the supports that we put in the classroom will help. We call them reasonable adjustments. That's what they're called. So as I said, the ILP alerts the teachers and the support team about your child's diagnosis, what supports your loved one might need at school to thrive. So that's what the ILP is. The other thing to look at is peer groups for your child to join. So one of the hardest things about being neurodiverse is that there comes a point when your child realizes that they're different. They realize that they're struggling and there's something going on. And often it's because they're struggling socially. So the thing about looking at different peer groups for them to join is that then when they're in a peer group with those that are similar, then they realize they're not so different after all. Now, ideas of these can be, some schools have, like at primary school, they'll have chess clubs and things like that. But other peer group supports can be programs that are autism or ADHD specific, but sometimes it's even joining a D&D group, a Dungeons and Dragons group, because a lot of people that play Dungeons and Dragons tend to be neurodiverse, because playing Dungeons and Dragons, it's creativity. You have to be a really, really a creative person, because you have to be able to write campaigns. Most people with that's generalizing, but quite a large portion of people with autism and ADHD are creative. So the environment of D&D is really, really good for them. Plus they will be other like-minded and similar people playing those games. So like peer groups like that, there will be organizations in your city that will run some of these peer groups. So like if you're in Canberra and you're watching, if you reach out to Merrymead can tell you about the different peer groups that exist in Canberra for supports that your child can join. The other thing also is peer groups for us as parents as well. There are support groups, I know particularly in Canberra, for parents with children with autism or ADHD, because the other thing too with that getting together with other parents is you realize you're not alone. There might be another parent in the room who's having exactly the same struggles that you are, or their child and your child are having the same struggles. So you can give each other that support. So that is really, really important too. So as I said, research those support organizations in your local area. There often will be autism and ADHD support groups. The other thing too, and this is the last point, is to join social media groups, so support groups. And believe me, there are many out there, and some great information is shared in them. So again, if you're watching from Canberra, there's a support group that I'm on that's called Canberra Autism Spectrum Parents and Relatives. So that's CASPA for short. You can join that group. So often people will put, they'll recommend good specialists, but also too, if you're having an issue, like I went in the other day to ask, I asked a question to the Brains Trust, but it was for a client of mine that I wanted some information. So I went in there to ask. There are ADHD support groups on Facebook there, and autism support groups. On Instagram, 2 really good ones for ADHD is there's one called ADHD Doers. So it's ADHD OERS, and also ADHD _understood. They're 2 really, really good Instagram pages for ADHD. So that concludes my live today. So thank you all of you who are watching. So James is on, and I can also see my lovely auntie is on watching as well. So hello. And Imogen, I hope that's answered some of your questions. If there are any more, please let me know, because I know that you're also wanting to create support circles for women, who support circles for women who have neurodiverse children. So if there's anywhere that any other information you'd like to know, please let me know. For those of you that watch later on and have questions, please put your questions in the comments. I will always come on and answer them. And the other thing is, if you do watch later on, please put #replay. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Have a fantastic day. Bye.